Hey, Marcus. All right, it should be broadcasting. I can check real fast. Just open up an incognito here. What time difference do we have with you right now?
It's about 10 o'clock here, so I'm on the East Coast, Easter time, but that's okay. I'm kind of a night owl. So how many people, what's the turnout like there?
So we had over 30 RSVP. I think right now we're at about half of that.
Yeah.
3, 6, 9, 10.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, about half.
Cool.
No, it's not, but we'll go with it. So it's supposed to be streaming on YouTube. I think that might be the better link to give people, because you don't have to be signed in. Let me see if I can get that though. Hey William, I've already started broadcasting. The link you sent us before, is that the YouTube link or the Hangout link?
The link I just sent you?
No, the one in Slack earlier.
That's
The YouTube? So that's the one we should be tweeting, right? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the link that's in my tweets is the one that we should be tweeting. That should go to the YouTube.
I'm going to go ahead and do that right now.
Okay. Are we ready to go? Thomas, that was for you. What you had? Yes, we're streaming. It's already muted. That's muted. Because mute is the mic. So you're hearing the speakers. Because I'm going through my mic. No, because they need to be able to hear. No. Put your headset on, you won't hear it. I got a headset. Want a headset? Here. I asked you earlier. Yeah, it's my thing. You got it, okay. Yeah. So plug it in and make sure it works. Almost there, I promise. So you're still muted. Jose, I'm going to hit the switch on the side there of his headphones. You're muted on Hangout.
Yeah, it's up to that.
Okay. Do you want me to get started or you can work on that? Okay. Alright, we're going to go get started real quick. Yeah, okay. We're going to we're going to do the intro right here because I have to do it through Hangout. So we're going to be a little unconventional this time with our intros. Because we're doing it through Hangout, I'm just going to sit over here. You guys have to just look at the screen usually. That's the best thing to look at. So moving forward, there's a lot of information in these intro slides. You can go to intro.sdlug.com. That will take you to these intro slides. If you feel like you need to try to copy down any of this information, it's there for you. And let's see. Okay. So I'm Eric. Showcome on Twitter. This is Thomas with his back to you guys. Very rude. Sorry about that. You hit the wrong button.
So, of course, you're Jeffrey White Hangout, but we've got meetups coming up. The South.
Right. So SDPHP. Yeah, I'll do it. So our kind of sister group, SDPHP, which is the PHP user group, our next meetup is February 10th. It's going to be downtown. As we know, we've been rotating between downtown and North County, so February is downtown. We don't have a topic yet. The next Laravel meetup is going to be here at carry.net. It'll be February 24th, and we don't have a topic for that. So if anybody wants to volunteer and talk, it would be a good month to do it. And we'll get to some great topics to talk about here in a second. You hit the wrong keyboard. Here's some great topics. Good.
This is our Trello board. This is a great way to look at the topics that are available to be discussed, or to put a topic that you want to discuss or see discussed on here. We've got a voting system in place, so you can say which ones you want to hear about more than specific ones. You don't have to be an expert in talking about something. You just have to spend a week reading about it, learning about it, and working to teach other people about it.
Right. So, I mean, even if you don't want to pick up a topic, if you just log into the Trello board and just vote on some topics that interest you, then the next guy who comes around who does want to pick up a topic, it may sway him what topic he wants to talk about. That's at trello.sdlug.com. So there's quite a few ways to get in touch with us. Many of you probably get to us through Meetup. We're really kind of pushing our Slack channel now. The Slack channel actually is the SDPHP Slack channel. If we get enough Laravel discussion going on in there, we'll be more than happy to create within the SDPHP Slack group, we'll create a Laravel channel just for us. Currently, the SDPHP Slack group has a bridge into the SDPHP IRC. So it's a way to allow you to participate in IRC if you're not really chatting with IRC. The way Slack works is you need to sign up through SDPHP or slack.sdphp.org. You just put in your email address. As soon as you have an invite, you log into sdphp.slack.com.
And if you don't want to get your information to a giant basis corporation, you can always use the IRC channel directly. If you're on Freenode, I found SDPHP. And you can always get a hold of us at our Twitter handle, San Diego Laravel, and our website, sd1.com.
That's right. Thanks for picking up those other ones. So we're going to try to hustle through a lot of this. Obviously, we have, I know so many of you came out to watch Thomas and I talk, but unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until next month probably because we got this other guy talking instead. But we're going to try to, there's been a lot of news that happened since our last meetup. Because we had skipped December. So just kind of kick it off. Laravel and Lumen 5.2 has been released. That's out in the wild. So that is actually a topic if you guys are looking for a topic to talk about.
We've also got a new information provider, Laravel.xyz. They do a breakdown of all the changes between each tag Laravel release, lets you know when the release comes out, what's changed. You can go through all the bit logs for GitHub and stuff like that. They've got a lot of great stuff, and that's the kind of the stats that everyone's really looking forward to in the future.
Yeah. Obviously, we've had PHP 7 release. That was a big release for the PHP platform, so that's kind of a big deal. A couple of Laracons have been announced. The US and EU Laracon dates have been announced in locations. The US one is in Louisville again, so I'm looking forward to that. And EU is in Amsterdam again. And I may be trying to go to that one. I don't know. I'm trying to talk the wife into it.
And if you're going to be attending one of the Laracon events, we'd love to have you guys say so in the meetup page so that the people who are going to be attending can communicate with each other and actually meet up during the convention itself.
Yeah, last year was fun. A few of us met up with each other. We actually ran into a few San Diego guys that hadn't come to the meetup before, and we all went out to dinner. It was fun. So a couple of, we thought we'd start a new slide. We're not going to get too deep into it right now, obviously because of time restraints, but we're going to do tips and tricks. A couple things that have been released recently is there's been a new ebook out there called Laravel Collections Unraveled. It's a pay what you feel is good sort of ebook, which is nice. The more money you pay, the more money the author gets. There's also a really nice link out there, 10 Laravel packages everyone should know about. Again, these slides are up there. Don't try to copy down that URL right now. The big one is at PHP World this year, Code Rabbi did a talk on 50 Laravel tricks in 50 minutes. And so one thing we thought about doing is taking that slides and maybe going through one or two of the tricks before every meetup. So moving forward, we'll go through this 50 Laravel tricks in 50 minutes. We'll just pull one or two out and go through those before every meetup. It'll be a nice little thing to do.
Our resources, as always, we have the Laravel podcast, Laravel News podcast, and the Laravel snippets.
Yep, there's quite a few blogs out there as well. Laravel News, Laravel, Laravel Daily, as well as a slew of handles you should be following if you're interested in Laravel. So, yeah, that's all on Twitter.
And these resources are all available on the SD blog website as well.
Okay. So big things for our sponsors, Carry.net, that's the facility you're at right now. They're a data center hosting facility. They kind of do everything from virtual to physical. If you have boxes that need hosting, this is the place to do it in. They offer virtual solutions as well. And if you're interested in that, William here works with Carry.net, so feel free to reach out to them and talk to them. If you see anybody at Carry.net as you're leaving, make sure you thank them. They don't have to do this, but they do, and they don't only do it for us, they do it for other development groups because they care that much about the just the community in general. They provide food and all that, and we're super appreciative of all that. So make sure you thank them. And David Dev, that's actually the company I work with and run and own and sponsor a whole couple of us do. We do a lot of the grunt work for the group. And we're going to have a new sponsor starting next month, Lara Jobs. They said they're going to send us some swag to pass out. So they'll be a sponsor starting next month as well. Okay, typically we take like a 5-minute break here for everybody to get an opportunity to get some food, do a quick bio break. But we're going to kind of bypass that right now because we're a little behind here, so I want to kind of get caught up. But if you're interested, behind you there's pizza. That's for everybody. There's drinks in the cooler there. It's just a little housekeeping. Again, we're real appreciative for Carry.net hosting us. Make sure you clean up after yourself. If you do need to use facilities, they're out to your right on your right-hand side. Okay? So if there are no questions, we will go ahead and get started with Jeffrey White. They're all good? Fantastic. All right.
Hey, Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little echoey, but it's okay.
We got the big mic off, right? Okay. And time, depending on how we're doing in time at the end, there is a mic over here. We'll make it hot. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Jeffrey. Again, he's on the East Coast, so we want to be conscious of his time and see where we're at. There they are, Jeffrey. your fans.
Cool.
All right. Gonna pull up my questions here. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate you taking this time.
Yeah, no problem.
So I don't think we need to introduce Jeffrey Way, but I'll go ahead and go through this. If anybody spent any time in Laravel, you most definitely have heard of Jeffrey Way. He is hands down the leader of education, especially of the Laravel platform. So is there anybody here that doesn't know who Jeffrey Way is? Okay. Nobody raised their hand, so you're good. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to dive into it if you're okay with it.
Yeah, go ahead, shoot.
So most of the people who know you know the great work you're doing on Laracast. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you started in Laracast, what attracted you to Laravel, and what inspired you to just go down that entire path?
Yeah, sure. I've always enjoyed the education aspect. I think we can all relate to the fact that if you do this for a living, it's kind of ridiculous in terms of what you have to learn. Like, the rabbit hole just goes so deep. Like, one thing I always say is that if I knew how deep the rabbit hole went in terms of what we have to learn, I wouldn't do it again. Because about over a decade at this point, it's like every single day I'm having to keep up on my skills. And if you don't, people just pass you so quickly. So one thing that I did way back, this is 10 years ago, is I created a blog, and then as I was learning, I would just document my learning. And I wasn't doing this for anybody else other than, I'm sorry, I'm getting so much echo there. I'm going to take my headphones off.
I'm hearing it as well. You got a live mic somewhere, because I'm muting. Are you mute? No, I just muted. Are you mute?
So this mic here?
Sorry, it's just whenever I talk, I'm hearing my own voice back in my ear, and it's kind of difficult.
Can you mute yourself when he's talking?
I am muted.
It's Tom?
I mean, are you hearing me? You're not hearing me, right? It's muted.
No, but the speaker's right there above your mic.
Yeah, no, it's muted.
Are we good? Keep going? Okay. Anyways, where was I? Blah, 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 blah. I didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. Anyway, so I was documenting my learning when I was younger, and the amazing thing was, like, people actually read my blog. And I remember, like, the first week, back then you would submit links to, like, these various websites, and they would display news articles in the sidebar. And I did that a couple times, and one day I had 400 visits to my site. And back then, that was like that many people visiting my really crappy website was basically the coolest thing in the world to me. So yeah, I did it more and more, and then I started working for a company called Envato, where I head up. You guys might be familiar with that. I headed up there. They had a site called NetTouch Plus. Not as popular anymore. They've kind of changed everything. But back then, that was like a really big web development training site, and I was the editor of that. I did a lot of content, and I was able to build up enough of a following. So at one point, I meet this guy, Taylor Otwell. This was right before he released Laravel 3. So, and really, you got to remember, like, Laravel 1 and 2, those came out kind of at the same time. You know how it is. Like, you release a framework, and he iterated pretty quickly. So I'm not sure. By the time Laravel 3 came out, it might have been maybe a year since he originally worked on it. I'm not sure. But anyways, yeah, I discovered this, and at the time, I was kind of jaded by PHP. I was really doing much more work in the Ruby world, because Rails is an excellent framework, and PHP just didn't have that. We had CodeIgniter, but like even back then, CodeIgniter was showing its age big time. So I saw this new framework, Laravel, and it made sense, and I could tell that Taylor. How do I explain this? I could tell that he understood how things should work, right? Because lots of people release tools and there's no documentation, and you go to the website and it's just some crappy bootstrap template, and you can tell they just didn't put much time into it. But even in those early days, Laravel was incredibly well documented. The syntax was like basically exactly what you would want, and that just didn't exist in the PHP world. So very quickly I knew it was something I wanted to invest my time in. So I started evangelizing it, and then eventually I created Laracast. And of course, at this point, Laracast covers way more than just the framework itself. It covers all manner of web development. But yeah, that was the initial goal, was to help promote Laravel, to give people education. In the Ruby world, especially, there was a website called Railscast. It doesn't exist anymore. Well, you can still go to it, but the owner, Ryan Bates, he's gone. He disappeared. So there's nothing like that. But I wanted something like that for PHP, because when you think of education sites, you think of like lynda.com or Treehouse, and those are excellent, but they very much are interested in teaching everyone everything. And it's like, that's not overly useful. Like, I wanted something where it's specifically for people who are interested in this tool and this language and whatever ecosystem is surrounds that. If you go somewhere else, yeah, they're going to teach you this and they're going to teach you that, but they already have your money, so they need other people's money. So they're going to branch out to iOS development or Android development. And yeah, I wanted something specifically for just our group, our people, to get as good as possible in one thing. If you want to learn Android, you can go somewhere else. But for PHP and Laravel and some JavaScript, that's specifically what I made Laracast for.
Excellent, thank you. So can you tell us about what equipment, what software, what are you doing now to create Laracasts? We see a Rode microphone there in front of you. What can you tell us about where you're at now with production?
Okay, very, very simple. Again, a lot of other sites, they do like lots of on-camera work and lots of animations and stuff. I don't do that, or even they do lots of slides and stuff. I don't know about you guys. When I'm watching a screencast, I hate slides. I'm sorry, I hate, yeah, diagrams and slides and graphs. Like my mind just, I fall asleep when I see those diagrams. I was very much a fan back in the day of a developer in the Ruby world named Gary Bernhardt, and he does basically exactly what I did, but more in the Ruby area, where it's just you're looking at some guy's code editor and you're watching his workflow. And I learned so much from him, versus other things where it's like, all right, next slide, and then you see 4 bullet points, and before you know it, you're falling asleep. So with Laracast, very, very simple. I use ScreenFlow. This is a Rode NTG2 mic. I don't know much about it. I hear it works well. And really, that's about it. I do recording with ScreenFlow, I do editing with ScreenFlow, and then I publish with Vimeo.com.
Cool. So you mentioned earlier about, you really try to stay focused on Laravel, some PHP, some JavaScript, and you really kind of do so much more with the, explaining some of the methodologies around development and testing and things like that. Are those conscious decisions as far as what like do you say, okay, I think this week I'm going to focus more on Laravel, or I'm going to focus more on some of the JavaScript, some of the Vue stuff you've been doing lately, or do you just kind of go with whatever's got your interest at the time?
I think it's kind of both, honestly. Like I'll tell you right now, I'm having to do some beginner level content. Like I have this series on the site called Laravel from Scratch. In fact, you can just go to laravelfromscratch.com. I have a domain for that. That's like the free series to bring everyone in. But I have to re-record it like every year because, as you can imagine, like a year ago, the framework was different. The directory structure was different. So especially for newcomers, they can't be watching videos where it doesn't match up with what they currently have. It's like a terrible way to learn. So I have to like re-record that once a year, and I'm having to do that right now. That's honestly like not the funnest thing in the world, but you have to do it. But the other half, yeah, is stuff I'm very into. So like testing is something I've evangelized for a very long time. What else? The Vue.js stuff. I think Vue.js is incredible. I think it's the JavaScript framework that people don't talk about enough. Everyone's obsessed with Ember or React. And then behind the scenes, there's this tool called Vue.js that's just ridiculously good. So I try to give that exposure. It's good from me as well because I can keep learning it and then passing on what I've learned. So yeah, it's probably some of both.
Excellent, thank you. So you've covered a lot of Laravel, one might even say almost everything Laravel. What can we expect to see from you in 2016?
You know what's amazing? When I launched the site in October 2013, and one thing I was worried about was like I'm going to run out of content. And, you know, I'll have a couple months, but then I'm going to run out. But then I started realizing I'm never going to run out because I've been continuously learning for over a decade now. And if you were to translate that all to education on Laracast, like I could keep going for years and years. It's amazing just the amount of content you have to pick up, or whether it's like HTML and then CSS and then JavaScript and then PHP and then a framework and then another framework and then architecture and then solid. You know, when I did a Laracon presentation like 6 months ago, I had this fun part where I went through like 6 or 7 or 8 different slides where I go very quickly through all of the things you have to learn. And the funny part was it took a long time. It was very funny, and then by the time I got done, that didn't amount to like 10% of what we really have to learn. So I'm never gonna get through everything I could cover. But in 2016, I want to focus quite a bit on just practical training. You know, this kind of happens at conferences a lot. There's a tendency to like show people what's new or show people something they don't understand. But that's not always useful. So people show you these fancy architecture styles, and it's cool to learn because like we all like learning new stuff. But then sometimes people take it too far. They go overboard, and it can almost stunt your growth because you're trying to learn these fancy things, and it's like, no, many times just keeping it very simple and clear, you know, kind of the basics and the fundamentals will take you so far. So I'm going to focus a lot on that, focus on practical coding and focusing on clarity and not so much on fancy acronyms and things of that nature.
Cool. So you mentioned Taylor Otwell, and he is the creator and maintainer of the Laravel framework. We had an opportunity to speak with him a few months back, and great guy, real nice to talk to. You two seem to be pretty good friends. How happy are you with the direction Taylor's taking Laravel? And as a side question, how often do you work directly with Taylor on projects?
I wouldn't be a very good friend if I said I wasn't happy with the direction of Laravel. So no matter what, I'm going to say it's great. But no, honestly, I think Laravel moves from strength to strength. With Laravel 3, it was great, and then it keeps getting better. And what's nice about Laravel is it's built around real-world problems. So it's built around Taylor will fall into some trap where it's like, man, I hate doing this over and over. I have to do this for every project. Can we make this simpler? If you think about something he's working in advertising right now is a tool called Spark. And basically imagine that like SaaS in a box where you immediately have billing, you immediately have subscriptions, you immediately have team accounts, and you can control all of that. That grew out of building SaaS apps and knowing how it's really difficult. If any of you guys have built a SaaS app before, just the process of dealing with the billing and the subscriptions and the team accounts. I've written this all myself. It's annoying as possible to write, and it's buggy, and you have to be very careful because you're dealing with people's money and credit cards, and it's not fun to deal with. So what if you could wrap that up and offer it to people? That's where Spark comes from. You know, a lot of Laravel comes from. Taylor's talked about like he needed migrations for a project he was working at his old company, so he built that and he put it into Laravel. So that's why Laravel feels so kind of practical and natural. It's because it comes from real life needs. It doesn't come from I don't know, academic ideas of what the perfect structure comes from. It comes from natural needs that real people have, and I think it shows very much. What was the second part of the question?
Do you currently work with them on a lot of projects?
It depends. Like we have a Telegram group, a handful of us, and we're kind of like a sounding board for him. Really, at the end of the day, it's like Taylor, 99.9%. This is his project. He is the guide. Some of us help. Obviously, tons of people will submit PRs. So we're kind of like a soundboard. I do some things. Like for example, I maintain Laravel Elixir. And if any of you aren't familiar with that, that's like Laravel's build tool. So like if you start a new project and you want to use Sass, or you want to use CoffeeScript or ECMAScript or Browserify, you know, all those common things, before Laravel Elixir, it frankly sucked because you had to create, if you were using gulp, you had to create this gulp file, and it's really difficult to read, and it's not. Basically, everyone would create like GitHub gists, and then they would just copy and paste it to every project. And I hear people talk all the time about how they have no idea what's happening in their gulp file. It just magically works, and they're terrified to touch it. So once again, Laravel Elixir stemmed from that truth of, man, gulp is great. Gulp was such an improvement over Grunt, in my opinion. But still, it's just painful to write. And for every new project, especially if you like to start up new projects and stuff, man, it's just a pain to set up that stuff up. So that was a situation where I worked with Taylor, and we were thinking, like, what if you just had this simple file where if you want Sass compilation, why can't you just call a Sass method and you're done? If you want browserify, why can't you just call .browserify and you're done? You know? So we saw that and we built it, and that's what I maintain right now. That's probably like my biggest contribution to Laravel because I'm working on it every day. I've had other little things like in Laravel 5.2, you have all that new application testing, and that's where you can say, like in a test class, you could say this visit this URL, and I expect to see. So you call a see method. That stuff was ported over from a package that I built, and so just stuff like that. But yeah, 99% completely Taylor. It's his project.
And if you had to do a quick elevator pitch to somebody on, why use Laravel, what some of the biggest strengths and maybe some of the weaknesses are, what would those be? What would that sound like?
The elevator pitch for Laravel, it's what you wish a framework would be. Actually, you know what? That's probably not true because plenty of people, for some reason, really dislike the framework. But for me, it's exactly what you would want to see. So, like, you go to the routes file, and it says route : get a URL, and it's like, I understand this completely. There's no education required to know how this works. With lots of other tools, they are so focused on configuration that it becomes overwhelming. For example, Symfony obviously is a great tool, has contributed so much to the ecosystem, but it's overwhelming to developers at first. Laravel is not overwhelming. So that would be my simple elevator pitch. If you are overwhelmed by other tools, Laravel is not overwhelming. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of the question. I'm sorry, guys, it's late. So
that's fine. Actually, that leads us right into my next question here, which is, do you feel that it's safe to take a beginner developer and jump them straight into a framework such as Laravel, or do they need to work within PHP core, basic first?
Okay, cool. Beginner to PHP, under no circumstances would I put them on a framework yet. Man, I can't think of anything more overwhelming at that point. Like when you're learning PHP, you do not need to see some big directory structure with folders named policies and jobs and providers and controllers. You don't know what a controller is. You don't know what a model is. You do need to learn the basics, of course. And then the same is true with anything else. If you're learning math, it's sort of like saying, should you learn algebra first, or should you learn the basics of arithmetic? Obviously, the latter. The same is true with Laravel. You need to have some experience with PHP, a year or so, maybe. I don't know, maybe build a couple projects with Vanilla P, not maybe to release, because really it's kind of dangerous to do all this stuff with Vanilla PHP in terms of security. But yeah, if you do it the vanilla way, once you switch over to something like Laravel, you appreciate it so much more because you realize, oh my gosh, I was having to do it this way before, and it was the worst thing in the world, and now I only have to do this, and this just automatically works. And maybe you appreciate it a little bit more. So yeah, get at least a year, maybe 2 under your belt if you're doing it every single day, and then you'll be ready. And the same is true probably with JavaScript. We used to talk about this with JavaScript all the time. Like, do you learn jQuery before vanilla JavaScript? And jQuery is JavaScript, and the same Laravel is PHP. So to some extent, yes, you can do it, but as a general rule of thumb, learn the fundamentals first, and then you can move up.
You said I wouldn't put them on a framework yet. Is there something in your head where you're talking about frameworks in the future sort of advancing beyond vanilla PHP where you would put someone on a framework first?
Nope. Nope. All I meant was, no, not at all. I just meant writing everything from scratch is really good for your learning. Learning how routing works and learning how to manually work with PDO versus using Active Record or something like Eloquent. There is a benefit to learning that, if only to pay your dues. I think there's a lot of value in it, and the frameworks have to some extent a lot of magic. And you want to be careful because you need to some extent know what's happening. So when I use Eloquent, I understand behind the scenes it's using PDO. If I just immediately jumped into it, I wouldn't know that. And then if I switch to something else, well, all I know about working with a database is that I could use Laravel's Eloquent. So if I switch to something else, I don't know anything. My education has been completely reset. So you do need to learn the fundamentals, and that's the only thing I was saying, before you pick any framework for any language.
Yes. So at Laracon US, Taylor mentioned how much pride he took in the fact that people would come up to him and talk about, hey, I'm making a living now off the Laravel framework. I'm able to work for myself or provide for my family, and that was a big deal to him. Obviously, a lot of people are starting to make money off the framework, and I'm just curious. Do you see Laravel ever becoming more of a quote unquote enterprise framework, more in lines of, say, a Zen or a Symfony? And exactly how do you define an enterprise framework?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said quote unquote. Like what is enterprise development? It's kind of a blurry thing, and this is a funny knock against Laravel itself. Is people are always like, yeah, Laravel is good for small projects, but for anything you need to maintain, well, then you need to use something else. And so people throw around words like enterprise and maintain. And my thought is always like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you referring to? What does maintainable mean? I'm not able to maintain a Laravel project. It's like the only thing that would make something unmaintainable is just bad coding, and then that will be true for regardless of what tool you use. So to answer your question, will Laravel ever advance to being an enterprise level framework? To some extent it already is. There are projects that have millions of views a day that are built on Laravel. Is that enterprise? I don't know. I think I don't worry about it too much. If enterprise level companies want to use Laravel, and they do, then no problem. I don't think about it too much beyond that.
So I'm going to ask you a pretty broad question here, but seeing as it's the big news recently, how do you feel about PHP 7?
It was fantastic. No complaints, honestly. Basically, across the board, your projects in PHP 7, at least in terms of the PHP side, twice as fast. You don't even need to do the numbers. It's just basically project for project, the PHP side will be twice as fast, which is really nice. There's a number of cool new things. I still think sometimes PHP, I feel like sometimes the maintainers behind it, they focus more on things that you don't necessarily use. So a good example I sometimes bring up is like generators got added. Cool, everyone was happy about that. I think if you just talk to people, nobody is using generators really. I think most people don't even know what they are. Versus things that would actually improve your day-to-day life, whether it's like short functions with PHP or things like that. Sometimes I feel like they get a little disconnected from what your typical developer is doing. But that's just a small gripe. In general, PHP 7 is great. It's a welcomed addition. I love that PHP 7, or I'm sorry, PHP in general, is not something we have to feel bad about. Like I worked with this language years ago when like you had to apologize for it. You had to be like, yeah, I use PHP, and Ruby developers or Python developers would make you feel like crap, because you hadn't graduated to a more proper language. I like that now. I'm very proud of PHP. I'm very proud of the ecosystem. When you think of 2008 versus now, we have Composer, such a good dependency management tool. Compare like Composer to NPM, it's so much better. With NPM, it takes like 5 minutes to install. Composer is so good. We now have PHP 7. We have tools like Laravel. Just the package ecosystem through Composer is fantastic. We've really made huge strides in the last handful of years. So I am very proud to be a PHP developer at this point.
Right, you kind of lead us right into our next question. Personally, I have trouble even remembering what development was like before Composer. It's just changed the landscape dramatically for PHP development. With the exception of Composer, you can't use that now because you've already mentioned it. What do you feel are some of the more important PHP projects going on out there right now?
Most important PHP projects. You know, it's just, there's not like one thing that specifically stands out. It's just in general, like, if you think of Laravel or Symfony itself, they are built with components, and that's so different from the way it used to be. It used to be that every like framework, they just built their own things. They built their own router. They built their own HTTP handler. You know, it was like everything was so segregated, and now they all use the same tools. It's really nice. That is the huge advancement for PHP. For example, with Laravel, it can make use of all of these. Like Laravel, a lot of people don't know, Laravel uses tons of Symfony components. So if you can pass off the work of maintaining that, Taylor and anyone else are able to focus on more unique things to the framework, like Eloquent. That is the really nice thing about it. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. If you want to reinvent it and make it better, do it, but you don't have to. In terms of packages specifically, obviously, like PHP Unit has been the bedrock in terms of testing. I use the Faker library. I think is so good. You might use Faker if you use Laravel's model factories in 5.2. That gives you a quick way to quickly whip up factories for your database. Or if you just want to create dummy data for whatever purpose, I use that all the time. There's a package called Intervention, and that's for like creating and managing thumbnails. There's so many things. I could go on and on.
So I'm back to ask you another general, broad question. What are your current interests? Not necessarily in the PHP space, but PHP space included, of course.
General interest in terms of coding, development.
General interest is coding, or it could be podcasting if you've gotten really into high-tech microphone equipment or whatever it could be. Like, what's your thing right now?
I'm doing a podcast right now. I started this in December. What I'm interested in right now is like projects. I remember listening to somebody talk, and they said people split into two groups. You have the one side where they need to be working on new stuff all the time. They like to have new projects and new problems to solve. And then you have other people where they thrive when they have like one thing to be responsible for. So, and there's no wrong or right. You just fall into one group. I would say I don't fall into one group. I have liked with Laracast that this is like my baby. I'm the manager of it. I do the content for it. I do the coding for it. So it's like live or fail, it's on me, and I like that. That's really good in terms of educational. It forces you to learn things that you wouldn't otherwise. Like sometimes coders, like if you're the architect guy for a company, that is the most important thing, and nothing is more important than that. But if you move up a couple levels to like the owner, they're not quite as focused on that. They're not saying it's not as important, but they're focused on 10 other different things. Marketing is a big thing for them. The brand itself, and of course the code. So when you launch something by yourself, it forces you to play every single role, and it forces you to learn things like accounting and how to deal with that. God, that sucks. So that's been hugely educational for me. I would like some other projects. So like in December, I started a podcast. It's in the vein of there was, I'm trying to remember, about a year ago, there was this big movement for people to start little video casts or podcasts of like 5 minutes just to pass on your education. So a lot of people did that. A friend of mine, Matt Stauffer, did a 5-minute Geek Show podcast. I listen to it all the time just because it's like 5 minutes. You know, it's something I can do on the way to check the mail or when I take my dog out. So I wanted to do something like that where I could take one thought and just put it out there. That's one tough thing about Laracast is that everything I do is very technical based. It's how to accomplish this. If you want to work with such and such API. Here's how you could go about doing that. But there's so much more to our world than just how do you do this. You know, there's the community aspect. There's the ideas and the emotions associated with being a coder in 2015. So I created a podcast. One, just to have a project. It's good to start new things and force yourself to commit to it. And then two, to have some kind of outlet to talk about things. Like I was talking, I can't remember what my last podcast episode was. You can go to laracast.audio if you want to check that out. I was talking about this idea that we all have to take things too far before we learn to dial it back. And this goes with that idea of like you learn something new like command-oriented architecture or anything, once again, just these fancy terms where you feel like I have to learn this if I'm going to be a professional developer. And then you learn it and you apply it to everything. Like it doesn't matter how useful it is, you apply it to everything. And I used to try to think of ways to fight this, but then I realized we all do it. You have to do it. It's how you learn. You take this and you put it in every single place you can, and then you realize, oh, in this particular scenario, that's just stupid as hell to do that, so I'm not going to do that. And you learn to kind of roll it back. That's what the podcast is good for me, to talk about things like that don't necessarily have a place as a screencast. So other than that, a project I'm going to do is write a book. I have another app I'm kind of quietly working on, seeing how it goes. So, yeah, lots of stuff.
You mentioned Laracasts and the Laracast snippets. You've spoken before on the Laracast snippets about imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if your assertiveness in the Laracast snippets about the psychology of being a software developer was your own take on dealing with all of the problems that come with being an authoritative source on programming.
Yeah. First, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I think we should all be just more honest about that fact that none of us knows what we're talking about. I love, and I've done this myself, but you get in these like Twitter wars where you're fighting people over whether this thing is good, this practice is good, and it's just all people parroting whatever they read in a book 6 months ago. I read this in a book, and this says this is true, so I'm just going to pass that along to you and take you down. Nobody knows what they're talking about. I've learned that over 10, 12 years. It's kind of freeing when you think of it in that way. You know what? There's special people who are just geniuses, and they're ridiculously talented. But the rest of us, you know, we're just battling it out on Twitter without having a clue whether what we're saying is right. We just know, well, with this one project I worked on, it was the right choice, so I'm just going to recommend that to the newcomer that comes around. It's stupid. Dunning-Kruger or imposter syndrome. You know if you have it, right? If you secretly feel that everyone else is better than you, if you secretly feel like there's something everyone else has figured out that you don't know, you might have imposter syndrome. And from what I've seen, like most people, if they admit it or not, most people feel that way. Maybe they won't admit it, maybe they secretly feel it at night, but we all have it to some extent. And I think it's good, like if you can accept and recognize that this is a natural thing to feel. It's natural to feel like when everyone on Twitter is sharing their accomplishments, sometimes it adds a shadow over the fact that not everyone is doing great. They're just sharing only the things that went well. And then suddenly that makes you feel like, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm not contributing to open source as much as I should. I don't have some great new SaaS app. Most people don't. You know, we all feel that way. So it's kind of freeing if you can accept it.
Okay, I just want to take a moment to clarify. They talked about a couple of podcasts there. If nobody's familiar with it, there's the Laravel podcast that Jeffrey, Taylor, and Matt, right, are all participated in. Great podcast, extremely funny, wonderful one to listen to. And then Jeffrey's new podcast is called Laravel Snippets, which is just Jeffrey doing a quick, 10-minute podcast. Fantastic podcast. I can't recommend both those more. The Laravel podcast is about once a month, and Snippets, how often do you do that, Jeffrey? About weekly?
Once a week on Monday.
Yeah, it's a great I mean, it doesn't really talk about Laravel-specific topics all the time, but just talks about great topics that I'm sure everybody's dealing with, especially if you're a developer. So, I doubt you remember, but at Laracon US, you were doing an interview with Eric Eric Burns, and I got the opportunity to ask you and Taylor, how do you guys stay motivated? And how do you continue to do this day in, day out? I kind of want to ask that question to you again for this group: is what gives you that spark? How do you find that motivation to keep doing this?
It's tough sometimes. Burnout is a very real thing. I was feeling this back in December, like a month ago. I felt very much burned out. Have you guys ever had this thing where like you're working on a project or you need to add some new feature, whether it's for your own thing or for where your company is, and you just think to yourself like, I don't have the capacity to get into this right now. Like my mind, I can't invest my energy into another big feature. And usually, yes, it's just burnout. We weren't meant to sit and look at computers all day, especially at code editors. You have to love it, but eventually if you do it enough, you're going to burn out. And I felt that happening. I felt pre-burnout. I think a lot of people know pre-burnout, where you think, I need a vacation. I need to get away from this a bit because I cannot look at terminal another day. And that's just your body telling you need a break, and that's a good thing. So I feel that some ways. In terms of staying motivated, it's knowing when that's coming and making sure that it's hard at a company, but knowing that you need to take some time off. You need to. It's tough because we work all day, and then if you come home, if you work with a company, like so many of us will work on side projects, or on the weekend it's your only time to work on side projects. And then beyond that, like you're looking at your phone every damn second. I do it too. And it's like you have this screen in your face so many hours of the day, and it's not good for us. So we all end up burning out. Back to your question. I'm not answering your question at all. In terms of staying motivated, loving it. I'm in this industry because I get excited by stuff. Whether it's learning how to accomplish some new way of approaching a task, or learning Laravel and thinking, wow, this is really cool, or Vue.js, and it's like with Vue.js, the creator of it, like I feel like he cracked it. JavaScript sucks. JavaScript is so hard to work with, just to be frank, at least in my opinion. This guy cracked it because it just feels so natural. So that stuff gets me excited. I want to invest more energy into it. I think, how can I refactor what I did before so that I can use this, and then I can delete all of this stuff. Like the ability to delete pages of code is the best thing in the world, and that's what keeps me motivated. But I'm not answering your question. What's next?
So this is, once again, a very broad question from me, but I think everyone who's watching right now and everyone who's here right now, we are passionate about what it is we're doing. We love what it is we're doing, but it's also a career path for us. We have goals and plans set out. We struggle with whether or not we can achieve what we want to achieve, or if what we want to achieve is realistic. Do you have a plan in the future? Do you see Laracast becoming a grandiose thing, a bigger thing? How do you see this developing in the next 5 years or so?
Okay, cool question. Laracast has been incredibly successful for me. It's the best decision I've ever made. Before Laracast, I was working at a company, and if any of you have switched companies you weren't happy with, like I was very happy at my previous company, but at some point, especially if you're doing the same job, you do the same thing over and over, and it wears on you, And again, that's just your body telling you need a change. So when I left that company, it was a good-paying job. To do this thing on my own, it's a very risky thing, especially if you're married. Like my wife was not too happy about me leaving my job to try out this website. She wasn't too happy. She was a little nervous about it, and I can't blame her. And it's one of those things where, like, I think my wife is pregnant right now, but if we had children, I'm not sure I would have been willing to take that risk. It's kind of a young person's risk, because when you're not responsible for other people, you just can't take the leap like that. So I was lucky. I've forgotten the question entirely. What's the question again? Guys, I'm sorry. It's 11 o'clock at night. Cut me some slack. One more time.
No, we're sorry. The question is that besides, it's obvious that you. Oh
yeah, do I have a point? Okay, sorry. I do this.
It's obvious that you love what you do, but we're interested in how you see your professional development in the next 5 years versus what we're all comparing ourselves
Okay.
to as far as personal development.
Cool. Yeah, this is the problem. I go out on tangents and then I forget the original question. Where do I see Laracast in 5 years? No clue whatsoever, and I think that is the correct answer. I love the. I listened to this guy. What is his name? I'm so tired. I can't think of his name. The creator of CD Baby. You guys probably know. He does a lot of speaking at this point, and he just has the most practical advice you've ever seen. So many colleges, and they will teach you about how you need to create these plans for your business that project what it's going to be in 5 years. And he has this quote that I love, and he says, you know how it's all BS? It's BS because when you look at those graphs for the projected revenue, it's always going up. Like, the projection is always going up, and it just doesn't work like that in real life. So that's how you know, like, some of that stuff is, those projections are stupid. They serve no purpose. I think about 3 months in advance, and that's about it. But in terms of like where I hope Laracast would go, I hope it reaches more people in this market, but that's it. So I'm at a point where it's like I could hire more people. Right now, Laracast is a one-person business on purpose. I could hire a few more people. The business probably wants that, but I'm trying to fight that as much as humanly possible because you introduce a whole new world of crap to deal with, to be frank. You have to deal with payroll, and you have to deal with being a manager, and you have to deal with I don't know, performance reviews. You either want to go down that road and you want to get funding or VC funding and you want to really get big, or is it okay to be happy with where you currently are? And that's kind of where I am with Laracast. I'm barely able to manage it by myself, and that's lucky because, and that's one nice thing with developers. Like, we have the ability to be the idea person and the coder and the owner. So many other people, it's like, yeah, they can be the idea person, but they're going to need you, the coder, to come help them. So we're in a unique position where you can kind of do it all yourself if you want to. So that's great. I'm barely able to maintain it. Would I want to, in 5 years, have a staff of 20 people? No. So I'm not going to reach for that goal. You have to know like where you want to go, and that's not where I want to go. I want to have more free time. I want to have more freedom for my family. Like I said, my wife is pregnant. I want to have more time for my children, so I want to optimize for that. I don't necessarily want to optimize for taking the revenue for the site and increasing it 20 times over. I'm not sure that would make me much happier.
All right, thank you so much. That's all we have for our scripted list of questions here, but we can run through a few of the questions we have from the audience. I'm going to have Eric start with a question that was tweeted to us, and I'll grab some questions from the audience that are here while you cover that one. Thank you.
Well, how about before we do that, we ask Jeffrey how he's doing on time, because we're right at about an hour here. Jeffrey, you got a little bit more in you?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay.
Unless I'm boring, you guys. I'm boring. I ramble, I forget the question, so it's okay if you want to cut me off. I won't get mad.
So, next question I'm pretty interested in, actually. This is one of the ones that was tweeted in. I think at the start of every Laracast video, it's always kind of like this Christmas Day excitement to see what sort of editor you're using. I know that's a big topic of discussion among some people. I'm a big Vim guy. I've noticed of recent you've kind of come back to Vim. Can you kind of tell us, what decisions do you go through as far as figuring out what tools you're going to use as specifically editors?
Sure. They have a saying, you never leave Vim. They don't have that saying, but I just think that happens to be true. I learned Vim years ago. Vim is amazing. There's always, we have it in us to learn the shiny new tool. Sublime was the shiny new tool. It was great. Sublime still is great. PHP Storm was the shiny new tool. I fall prey to that just as much as anyone else. And really, Sublime and PHP Storm are fantastic editors in their own right. I've used both of them for years at a time. I used Vim back in 2010. I used it every single day, and then I've heard a lot of people say this, like, for no reason you try out a different editor, and maybe it's just we're lazy and it's like I need to be working on this piece of code, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to research my code editor, or I'm going to learn how to fix or how to configure this part of my code editor. It's just like a form of laziness or I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I'll just randomly try out Sublime, and then suddenly I've switched to Sublime. Recently, I realized I love Vim. Like Vim, I said this the other day. Like if you learn Sublime, really good editor, you're gonna master your workflow pretty quickly. If you can see my hand. With something like Vim, it's gonna go much longer. You just can't do it as quickly. But once you get to the top with Vim, you're way higher than you were with Sublime because you can mold it precisely to your work style. But no, I would never want to force anyone to use Vim or anything else. You know, a code editor is a very personal thing. If you're going to spend 8 hours of your day with it, it needs to be something that feels perfect for you. Vim is one of those things when you try it out for the first time, it's like a white background, no syntax highlighting nightmare where you type keys and it doesn't respond the way you expect it to. And that's because it's not like every other code editor you've used. It takes an investment. You have to spend a month or two configuring it, but once you do, you will love it. It's very difficult to go back. So like I said, Vim users will leave it, but they almost always come back.
And just as a side note, I know you have a vimrc file out there on GIS. Are you planning on updating that anytime soon?
That thing is so old, I wouldn't use it. Yes,
No.
I'm doing a because I'm doing Vim a lot more. A lot of Laracast users have asked me to do like a Vim series to show how I built that. So I'm doing that right now. I will upload my full vimrc, fully documented. I'll do that in the next day or so. So if any of you are interested, you can go through that. You know, that's the way it works with Vim. Like, look at a sample vimrc file and then copy and paste to your own setup, and then you just mold it exactly the way you like it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So we're struggling with some feedback here, but we do have some audience questions, and we're going to go ahead and try to make that mic hot. We'll see how it goes. If it's too much feedback, let me know. Go ahead.
Hello? Good. Hey. Jeffrey, hi, good to meet you. I'm Gene. It's good to see you talking live.
Hey,
Just
man.
a quick question. Hey. What are some deciding factors when you hit like a new project and you see the specs, and what are some of the deciding factors that'll lead a team to want to implement with Lumen versus a full Laravel? Just some general toss-ups.
Good question. The Lumen Laravel thing, I think, has been tough. I think Taylor originally intended Lumen to be used for one specific thing, and then people started using it for another. So I think a lot of people started thinking Lumen is great for small projects, and then for large projects you use Laravel. That's not necessarily the case, and the performance gains you're going to get from Lumen at this point over Laravel, they're not. It's sort of like pre-optimization. If you're building something small, that doesn't mean you reach for Laravel. I'm sorry, that doesn't mean you just need to go for Lumen. You just stick with Laravel. Lumen is great for things like microservices or little APIs where it needs to be fast as humanly possible. For things that actually have views and like a web layout, you can use Lumen if you want. It'll work, but I would just use Laravel in almost all cases at this point. Laravel is pretty fast at this point. Now that we have PHP 7.2, the perf differences between Lumen and Laravel are not as much as you would think.
Hi there, my name's Brett. Have you played with Node.js, and would you use Node.js side by side with a PHP project, and for what purposes?
Okay, cool. Hey, Brett. Yes, I've used Node.js. For example, Laravel Elixir, ironically, is not PHP. That's all built with Node.js. But I don't have an enormous level of experience with it. It's weird. We've somehow fallen into this thing where everyone thinks they need to build applications in JavaScript. I don't know when that happened because we weren't huge fans of it back in the day, but it's definitely improved so much at this point. Node.js and Express, I think, for that environment is about as good as you can get. It feels good. It's still a little verbose for my taste, but yeah, Node.js is great. Were you saying using it with PHP?
Well, for example, I was basically under the impression that PHP is good for loading pages and Node.js is good for chat.
Oh, yeah, of course. So yeah, in those situations, it would depend on the project, but yeah, when it makes sense for Node.js, obviously that would be That would make perfect sense. With PHP, you can start to do some of that stuff. There are some tools available, but yeah, it's still kind of weird. It wasn't originally made for that, so it almost feels like you're being a little hacky trying to get it to work. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Hi Jeff, nice to meet you. My name is Islam, and I wanted to ask you about, for example, when you're building something new now, like you have too many choices, and like for example, recently, like with the introduction of Vue.js, I find it very, very easy to build stuff on the front end and create an API and just consume that API to do something. But at the same time, like I keep thinking, should I do that, or should I just keep doing everything on the back end and just use JS for some functionality on the front end? So, like, how do you think about it? Like, which way should you go?
Yeah, it's tough. We're still having the conversation, so I don't think there's any answer. Like, for example, you could build an application with Vue.js or Ember or React, it doesn't matter, where it's basically an SPA. So the page loads, you make an AJAX request to fetch your data, you receive that data, you filter through it, and you build up like a template, or you compile a template, and then you inject it into the DOM. And then when the user clicks on it, once again, you intercept the link and you make another request, and it's an SPA, a single page app. Another approach is something like PJAX, or if you've ever worked in the Rails world, they have TurboLinks. It's kind of the Ruby, the Rails version of PJAX. So the way PJAX works is when you click on a link, let's say you click on a link and it will load a page, and you're using the server side to echo out all of the data. Like you're using Laravel and the Blade to echo out the data. With PJAX, you're still doing that, but it all goes through AJAX. So you click on a link, PJAX will intercept that link, it'll make an AJAX request to the server, it'll receive a fragment of HTML in response, and then it will automatically insert that data into like a predefined block on your DOM. So that all is automatic. So that's sort of a different way to do it. You're not loading the page again, so you're not having to reload the JavaScript and all of the assets, which is really the slow part of everything. So you're able to not do a page refresh, but you can still make a request to the server to fetch data. And when you do that, you're not having to... Sometimes you fall into a trap where you may have to build the same app twice almost, where it's like you build the routing on the client side and then you have routing on the server side, and it gets kind of awkward. You still may have to do that, but PJAX is a totally different approach, and it's up to us to decide which one feels best. SPAs are the very popular thing at the moment. I don't know about you guys. I don't know how great that feels. In terms of how to use is sometimes awkward, but also just how to code it up isn't the most enjoyable thing in the world to me. So I feel like in many ways PJAX or TurboLinks is kind of a good middle ground, but we haven't figured it out.
Thank you. What is a typical day in the life of Jeffrey Way? That is, I think if I've been listening close enough, I hear that you run Laracast, you produce the webcast, upload it, handle all the business side, you contribute to repositories and open source code, you produce 2 podcasts. I assume somewhere in there you find time to be a good husband. So what is a typical day in the life of Jeffrey Way, and how do you find time to accomplish all that you're able to accomplish?
Cool. I'm able to accomplish it because I love it. You guys are here at a meetup because you love it. Otherwise, you know an interesting fact? Among coders, we think everyone who goes to these meetups are the typical coders. They are not. Your typical coder at 5 o'clock is going home, and they don't think about it again until 9 a.m. the next day. So you guys, or anyone that goes to conferences or meetups, you're the minority. You're like the 5% of people who are passionate about it, that you want to immerse yourself in every possible way, even after work. So I think that's pretty amazing, and I think it's a prerequisite if you want to be able to do a bunch of stuff. Like plenty of you, I'm sure you have your job, and then you have your side projects, and then you contribute to open source. And the amazing thing about open source is we do it for free. It makes no sense. It boggles the mind of I'm sure managers everywhere. It's like you work, and then you go home, and you contribute for free. Like, why would we do that? It's an amazing thing. Why would you write code for free? And it's just this sense of like wanting to be, I don't know, wanting to be appreciated, or wanting to feel like you're contributing, or wanting to feel like you're respected among your peers. I don't know what the reason why we do it, but it's pretty interesting. Once again, not answering your question. So what is the day in the life? It's different every day. That's a fun thing. If you get too stagnant, I don't think that's good for us. You need to be focusing on new things all the time. And in terms of creating like content and education, that's about a third or a fourth of the day. A lot of the day just goes to building the site itself and adding new features and working on new ideas. For example, Fridays is when I maintain Laravel Elixir. So that's when I go through all of the issues and the PRs and work on new stuff. But a lot of it, I feel like I never get everything done. I have a to-do. I'm like ridiculous about to-do lists. I'm always researching new ones. Once again, I think it's a way to be like lazy and not do your job. So you just research to-do lists. But I never finish it at the end of the day. But it feels good if I can knock off a handful of things, and you do your best. And too often, I'm in bed with a laptop, and that is the worst thing in the world. But I do it. But yeah, at the end of the day, you just have to enjoy it. I find myself reaching for my code editor when I should be relaxing, and that's bad because that's what leads to burnout. But at the same time, what an amazing thing that in my free time, I reach for that. Most people and in most industries, you would not do that, but we do.
All right. Last question. I appreciate all the time you've spent with us. This is a real softball. Somebody tweeted in asking, what headphones are you wearing?
I don't know. Hold on. Okay. I'm glad you guys are asking the important questions. It's Jabra, Jabra. I bought these off Amazon. They're about $100 or $150. They were just they're Bluetooth headphones. I'm using a wire in this case, but they're good. I don't know if they're good or not. They're fine.
All right.
Anything else?
I believe that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for speaking with us. It was absolutely enlightening for me, I know, and it's wonderful hearing from you again. I've listened to you at Laracon this year as well. If you have any statements or anything you want to plug before we go, here's your time.
Sure. Final closing statements. I have none whatsoever. Thank you everybody for listening to me ramble. I hope I didn't bore you. Check out Laracast.com if you're not familiar with it. I invest a lot of my energy into it. It's specifically for developers. It's not for newcomers, like learn how to make a website. That's great. It's great we have that stuff, but Laracast is for working developers. So I hope you check it out, and thank you for listening to me.
Very good. Thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it. All right, appreciate it, Jeffrey.
Cool,
We've
thank you guys.
increased the echo to try and make it sound like there's hundreds of people here for you.
I like it. I like it.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you guys.
Good night.